Sometimes life's best surprises come when you least expect them. When you're so lonely that even a stranger feels like a gift, your heart knows something your brain hasn't figured out yet. Silas McGrow, a mountain man, was just dropping off supplies at a ranch in 1800s Montana when he knocked on the wrong door. The woman who opened it, Margaret Lawson, a widow running a struggling ranch, looked at him and said, "God sent you to help me have a son." She was in a tough spot. Her ranch was falling apart, and her family line was at risk of ending. Silas was a guy who'd spent years staying away from people, but Margaret saw something special in this rough-looking stranger that he didn't even see in himself. She needed someone to protect her, work with her, and be a father to the kids she dreamed of having. He needed a reason to stop hiding from life. Could these two very different people find love and build a family in the wild Montana frontier? Before we dive back into their story, let us know where you're reading from. And if you're loving this tale, hit that subscribe button because I've got something super cool saved for you tomorrow. The morning sun stretched long shadows across the Montana wilds as Silas Grizzly McGrow led his pack horse down a twisty mountain path. At 42, his face was worn from years of living in tough weather. Deep wrinkles from wind and sun, a graying beard that hadn't seen a barber in forever, and sharp gray eyes that had seen more alone time than most folks could handle. His strong shoulders carried not just his supplies, but the weight of a life spent far from others. The leather bag on his horse held medicine, salt, coffee, and bullets, stuff people needed out here. Silas didn't ask why folks ordered supplies. People living this far out had their reasons, just like he had his. It worked for everyone. They got what they needed, he got enough money to keep going, and no one had to chat about boring stuff like the weather or town gossip. His cabin was tucked in a valley so far off the map, most folks didn't even know it was there. He'd built it himself 15 years ago after deciding he was done with people. It was sturdy, useful, and lonely, just like most of his life. Winters there were brutal. Summers brought bears and wild storms, but being alone was his best friend. Lately, though, something was bugging Silas that he couldn't quite put a finger on. Maybe it was how he kept talking to himself more, or how he'd started chatting with his horses like they might actually answer. The quiet that used to calm him now felt heavy, like it was pressing down on him. He started wondering if he'd gone so far from people that he forgot how to come back. The address on the paper in his pocket was getting hard to read as he rode. The ink was smudged, and his memory wasn't as sharp as it used to be. He'd been riding for 2 days, following landmarks that seemed kind of familiar, but not quite right. When the trail opened to a valley with a small ranch house and some barns, Silas felt a wave of relief. Smoke was coming from the chimney, so someone was home, probably expecting supplies. The ranch looked like it had seen better days. The fences were fixed up a lot, the barn was patched in spots, and there weren't many cows for such a big piece of land. It was a place where every nail and board was hard won, where winters were fought through, not just lived. As he got closer to the house, Silas noticed little things that showed a woman lived there. Wildflowers by the porch, curtains in the windows, and a neatness most single-guy ranchers didn't bother with. He got off his horse, tied it to a post, and knocked on the solid wooden door. The woman who answered wasn't what he expected. Margaret Lawson was about 5.5 feet tall, with auburn hair tied back in a simple bun, though some strands fell loose around her face. Her green eyes were sharp, full of smarts, grit, and a kind of longing that felt familiar to Silas, because he felt it too. She wore a plain blue dress that was a bit worn but clean and fixed up, and her hands were rough from working hard, not just bossing people around. But her face stopped him in his tracks. She didn't look at him like most folks looked at strangers with a tired politeness. Instead, she looked at him with something like amazement. Her eyes moved from his face to his broad shoulders, taking in his rugged mountain man look, then locked onto his gaze with a fierceness that made him want to step back. "You're not who I thought you'd be," she said, her voice shaking just a little, like she was holding back big feelings. Silas cleared his throat and pointed to his pack horse. "Ma'am, I brought your supplies. Medicine, salt, coffee, stuff like that. but I'm not sure I'm at the right place. Margaret stepped onto the porch, getting closer, and Silas caught a whiff of lavender soap and maybe a hint of hope. "What's your name?" she asked. "Silas McGrow. Folks call me Grizzly." "Margaret Lawson." She held out her hand, and it felt both proper and personal. When he shook it, her fingers were warm and tough, showing she worked hard. "You said you might be at the wrong place?" He pulled out the crumpled paper from his pocket. "The writing's kind of blurry, and I've been following landmarks that seemed right. Can I see that?" Margaret looked at the paper, her brow wrinkling. After a moment, she looked up at him with a look he couldn't quite figure out. "Mr. McGrow, this order is for the Henderson Ranch, about 20 miles north. They're waiting for medicine for their foreman's wife." Silas felt his face get hot. In 15 years of delivering supplies, he'd never gone to the wrong place. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll head out and let you get back to your day." "Wait." Her voice was sharp, then softened. "I mean, you've ridden a long way, and your horse looks tired. The least I can do is offer you a meal and some rest before you go on." Something in her tone made him stop. It wasn't just being nice. There was a hint of need, like something deep inside her was calling out. "That's kind of you, but I don't want to bother you." "It's no bother." Margaret stepped closer, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her green eyes. "Truth is, I haven't had a real talk with anyone in over 2 months. My nearest neighbor is 15 miles away, and my last worker quit last season." Her words hung heavy, full of meaning. Silas looked at her face, noticing the fine lines around her eyes from squinting into the sun and wind, the strong set of her jaw, and how she carried herself with pride, even though she was clearly asking for help. "I guess my horse could use a break," he found himself saying. Margaret's smile lit up her whole face. "Good. I'll make coffee and whip up some lunch. You can put your horse in the corral. There's hay in the barn and water in the trough." As he led his horse to the corral, Silas glanced back at Margaret as she went inside. Something about this mix-up felt important, though he didn't know why. He noticed a worn wedding ring, hanging on a chain around her neck, catching the sunlight as she leaned forward, then tucking it back into her dress like it was both special and painful. The barn was old but well kept, with neatly hung tools and everything in its place. This was a woman who knew surviving out here meant paying attention to details. When he got back to the house, the smell of coffee and bacon hit him. Margaret had set 2 places at a simple wooden table and moved around the small kitchen with quick, graceful steps. "Sit down," she said without turning around. "I hope bacon and eggs are okay. It's not fancy, but it'll fill you up." "Ma'am, I've been cooking for myself for 15 years. Anything that doesn't taste like burnt toast is fancy to me." She laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it did him. "Well, then you're in for a treat." As they sat across from each other, eating the first real meal either had shared with someone in a long time, Silas started to think his wrong turn might have been the right one after all. The meal went on longer than they planned. Margaret poured second. Cups of coffee, then thirds, like talking was as good as the food. Silas found himself chatting about things he hadn't talked about in years, the way animals moved in the mountains, how the weather had changed over time, little things that only mattered when you shared them with someone who got frontier life. "You've got a knack for understanding the land," Margaret said, holding her coffee cup like it was warming more than just her hands. "That's rare these days. Most folks try to boss nature around instead of working with it." "Nature's got its own plans," Silas said. "You either learn to go along with it, or spend your life fighting something stronger than you." Margaret looked at him closely, making him shift in his seat. "How long have you been alone up there?" The question hit hard. 15 years, more or less. Long enough to wonder why I thought it was a good idea." "What made you think it was a good idea?" Silas stared into his coffee, seeing old memories he'd tried to forget. "Sometimes you let down enough people that you think the kindest thing is to stay away from them. And now?" "Now I'm not so sure being alone is as great as I thought." Margaret leaned forward, her voice soft. "Mr. McGrow, Silas, can I show you something?" She went to a bedroom and came back with a leather folder, her hands shaking a bit as she set it on the table. "These are the papers for this ranch. she said, opening it to show official documents with red wax seals and neat handwriting. 512 acres that my late husband Thomas and I built from nothing. We came here 8 years ago with 2 horses, a wagon full of dreams, and a lot of stubbornness. Silas could hear the pride in her voice, but also a hint of fear or worry. It's good land, he said, not sure where this was going. It is, or it was. Margaret traced the property lines on one of the papers. Thomas died 3 years ago from pneumonia during a bad winter. I've been trying to keep this place going ever since, but she stopped, pulling herself together. I'm failing. Silas, I'm losing everything we built. Her words hung there like smoke from a fire going out. Silas saw how hard it was for her to say that, how her pride fought to keep those words inside. What kind of trouble are you in? Margaret pulled out another paper with newer handwriting. This is from the bank. I owe $800 in back payments. I have until the end of November to pay, or they'll take the ranch. That's 6 weeks away. $800 is a lot of money. It is. And that's not the worst part. She showed him another document. I should have enough cattle to pay it, but I've lost nearly 40 head this past year. Probably rustlers, though I can't prove it. They take a few at a time at night, not enough for the sheriff to care. Silas felt a familiar tightness in his chest, like when he'd faced big trouble before. Have you seen signs of who's taking them? Tracks heading north to the Badlands, always the same. They take 4 or 5 cows, drive them through the creek to hide their trail, and they're gone by morning. And you're out here all alone. The words came out flat, but Silas felt their weight. I can't afford workers anymore, can't afford bullets to chase the rustlers. Can barely afford to keep myself fed while I watch everything Thomas and I built slip away. Silas leaned back, thinking through her situation. A woman alone on a failing ranch, up against organized cattle thieves and money troubles. It was a lot for even a tough rancher to handle. There's something else, Margaret said quietly. Something I need to tell you about why I asked you to stay. She walked to the window overlooking the valley. When she spoke, her voice had a new tone, almost like awe. This morning, before you showed up, I was praying. Not regular prayers, but the kind you say when you're at the end of your rope. I was asking for help, for a sign I shouldn't give up, and let the bank take everything. She turned to face him, tears in her eyes. Then I heard hoofbeats. I looked out and saw you riding down the trail, and something inside me just knew. It wasn't logical, but I knew you were the answer to my prayer. Silas felt something shift inside him, like old walls around his heart were starting to crack. Ma'am, I think you're giving me more credit than I deserve. Am I? Margaret sat down across from him. You said you're questioning if being alone is as good as you thought. You've been alone for 15 years, and I've been alone for 3. We both know some things are easier with 2 people than 1. What are you saying? Margaret put her hand over his. Her touch was warm, rough from work, and steady despite her shaky voice. I'm saying maybe we found each other for a reason. Maybe your wrong turn was exactly where you needed to be. Silas looked at her hand on his, then into her eyes. Margaret, I'm not sure I'm the man you need. I've been away from people so long, I'm not even sure I know how to act around them. What I need, she said, her voice stronger, is someone who knows how to survive. Someone who gets that life out here isn't about fancy talk or sweet gestures. It's about getting up every day and doing what needs doing, whether you feel like it or not. She squeezed his hand. I need someone who sees cattle thieves as a problem to solve. Someone who knows the difference between a storm that'll pass and one that'll wreck everything. I need a partner. Silas. Not just for the work, but for everything that comes after. Her words hit him hard. In all his years alone, he'd never thought someone might need him, not despite his rough ways, but because of them. You don't even know me, he said. I know enough. I know you're kind to your animals. I know you're honest enough to admit when you're lost. I know you stayed for lunch with a stranger because you saw loneliness when it looked you in the face. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And I know that for the first time in 3 years, I don't feel like I'm facing the future alone. Silas stood and walked to the window, looking out at the land she was fighting to keep. The afternoon sun made the struggling pastures, patched barn, and distant mountains glow. What exactly are you asking me to do? Stay, she said simply. Help me save this ranch. Help me build something that lasts. She paused, her voice softer. Help me not be alone for the rest of my life." He turned to face her and saw hope mixed with trust in her eyes, like someone betting everything on one chance. "The Henderson Ranch still needs their supplies," he said. "Then we'll deliver them together, and when we come back, we'll figure out how to catch these rustlers and save this place." "Margaret, this is sudden. It doesn't make sense by normal standards, but sometimes the right thing doesn't make sense until you're brave enough to do it." Silas looked at this woman who'd been a stranger an hour ago, now offering him something he thought he didn't want: purpose, partnership, a chance to build something real. "If I stay," he said carefully, "it won't be easy. I'm used to doing things my way, and it might not match yours." "If you stay," Margaret said, "we'll figure it out as we go. That's what partners do, face problems together instead of apart." Through the window, Silas saw storm clouds gathering over the mountains. Winter was coming, bringing weather that could break even strong people. But for the first time in years, the thought of winter didn't make him feel like he was just surviving, alone. "All right," he said, the words feeling strange but right. "I'll stay." The ride to the Henderson Ranch took most of the next morning, testing how Silas and Margaret worked together. Margaret rode her horse like someone born for it, knowing the land well enough to pick the fastest route through tricky terrain. "Tell me about these rustlers," Silas said as they crossed a shallow creek, their horses stepping carefully over rocks. "It started about 8 months ago," Margaret said, her voice flat from thinking about it too many nights. "At first, I thought it was just normal losses, wolves, bears, or cows wandering off, but the pattern was too regular and I found boot prints where there should have been hoof prints." Silas got off his horse to check the creek bank, his eyes reading the ground like a book. "They cross here a lot. There's an old cattle trail through those rocks to the Badlands, perfect for moving stolen cows without being seen." He knelt, pointing at churned dirt and moved rocks. Margaret watched him, noticing how he seemed to feel the ground as much as see it. "How many men, you think?" "3, maybe 4. They're quick, in and out in under 2 hours. They know cows, know how to move them quietly without spooking the herd." Silas stood, brushing dirt off his hands. His hunting knife hung at his belt, and Margaret noticed it was well used but cared for, the leather handle worn smooth. It was comforting to see a man who took care of his tools. "We'll need a watch system," he said. "Can't catch them if we don't know when they're coming." I tried that. Lasted 2 weeks before I was too tired to keep going. "You can't run a ranch all day and stay up all night watching for thieves." "That's why there's 2 of us now." The simple truth hit Margaret hard. For 3 years, every problem was hers alone. The idea of sharing the load felt almost too good to be true. The Henderson Ranch was a mess when they got there. The foreman's wife had a fever and everyone was panicked. Silas's medical supplies were exactly what they needed. While Margaret helped care for the woman, Silas talked with Joe Henderson, a tough rancher who'd also had trouble with thieves. "Cattle thieves are hitting the whole area," Henderson said as they checked horses in his barn, swapping info. "Like frontier folks did, carefully but helpfully. Lost 12 cows last month. Same pattern as Margaret's?" "Close enough. Small groups, nighttime, tracks to the Badlands. Professionals, not random drifters looking for easy meat." Silas took it in while fixing a bridle. "You tried teaming up with other ranchers?" "Tried. Problem is we're all too spread out and short on help to do anything together. By the time word spreads about a theft, the trail's cold." As they got ready to leave, Henderson pulled Silas aside. "Margaret Lawson's a good woman. Lost her husband to something she couldn't control. Been fighting to keep her ranch going. She's proud, so it probably took a lot for her to accept help. I'm getting that. What I mean is, don't take it personally if she's picky about how things get done. She's been on her own so long, trusting someone else feels weird." The ride back to Margaret's ranch gave Silas time to think about Henderson's words. As they reached the hill overlooking her property, he saw her challenges clearly: pastures needing work, fences needing fixes, and skinny cows despite decent grass. "We should start with the big problems," he said as they unsaddled their horses. "Move the herd closer to the building so we can watch them better." Margaret stopped, holding her horse's bridle. "That's not how we've done it. Thomas thought letting cows roam made them stronger." Thomas wasn't dealing. With organized thieves. The words came out sharper than Silas meant, and he saw Margaret's face tighten. I know what you meant, she said, sounding defensive. But this ranch worked fine for years before you got here. Just because I'm struggling now doesn't mean everything we did was wrong. Silas took a breath, realizing he'd stepped into tricky territory. You're right. I'm sorry. I'm used to deciding things alone, and that won't work if we're partners. Margaret finished with her horse quietly, and Silas wondered if staying was a mistake. The woman who'd been so thankful for his help yesterday now seemed unsure about sharing control of her land. Margaret, he said as they walked to the house, help me understand. What do you want me to do here? She stopped and faced him. I need your skills, your know-how with tough situations. But this is still my ranch, my home. I can't have someone changing everything Thomas and I built without talking to me first. Fair enough. But you can't ask someone to help and then get upset every time they suggest something different. They stood facing each other as it got dark, and Silas knew this moment would decide if their partnership could work. You're right, Margaret said finally. I've been making choices alone so long that having them questioned feels like an attack, even when it's not. I've been alone so long I forgot how to explain my ideas instead of just doing them. She gave a small smile. We're quite a pair, huh? Two people who forgot how to work with others, trying to save a ranch. Maybe that's not so bad. We both know what we're risking. As they cooked dinner together in the small kitchen, Silas noticed how Margaret moved. Organized, efficient, careful not to waste anything. She'd learned to do everything herself, and it showed. Tell me about winter prep, he said as they ate. What needs doing? Hay for the cows, firewood for the house, fixing anything that won't survive the cold. Thomas and I spent September and October getting ready. Her voice had a touch of sadness, remembering her partner. We'll need to move fast, Silas said. We can't prep for winter, watch for rustlers, and build the herd all at once without a plan. Margaret nodded, her mind working. The cows are the priority. Without them, there's no way to pay the bank. Agreed. So we need to catch these thieves before they take everything. How do we do that? Silas pulled out his hunting knife and started sharpening it with a whetstone, the sound filling the quiet. Margaret watched his hands, seeing how carefully he kept the blade sharp. First, we figure out when they're hitting you. Look for patterns in timing or weather. Second, we make it harder for them. Move the cows closer, clear our view, maybe set up a warning system. Third, we make them think twice about coming back. Something in his tone made Margaret look up. What does that mean? Silas tested the knife's edge, drawing a tiny bit of blood. It means we make stealing your cows cost more than they're worth. The kitchen got quiet, except for the whetstone's scrape. Margaret saw a new side of Silas, not just the lone mountain man, but someone who'd survived 15 years in tough places by being ready to fight when needed. Have you ever killed anyone? She asked softly. Silas stopped sharpening and looked at her. Yes, but not in the last 5 years. The guys stealing your cows aren't going to stop because you... Ask nicely. They're hitting a woman alone because they think there's no risk. Now there will be. Margaret studied his face in the lamplight, seeing both comfort and unease. This man, who'd been so gentle in their talks, could clearly get tough when he had to. I don't want to be someone who fixes problems by hurting people, she said. You won't be. I will. The words hung between them. Margaret realized he was offering to take on the hard choices to protect her ranch, but accepting that offer might change their partnership in ways she wasn't ready for. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, she said. Let's plan for it anyway. 3 days into working together, Margaret and Silas fell into a routine that felt oddly natural. She did morning chores while he checked the land for signs of rustlers and picked spots to focus their defense. Afternoons, they worked together on ranch repairs, fixing fences, patching the barn, moving cows to safer pastures. One afternoon, while talking about the ranch's history, Margaret brought out her most precious item. She went inside and came back with a worn leather Bible, its pages soft from years of use. This was my grandmother's, she said, setting it carefully on a crate they were using as a table while fixing bridles. She brought it from Ohio when our family moved west. My mom got it next, then gave it to me when I married Thomas. Silas looked at the Bible but didn't touch it, knowing it was special. Your family's been heading west for a while then. 3 generations, each one moving a bit farther into new land, looking to build something that lasts. Margaret opened the Bible to a page with family records written in different handwriting over the years, names, birth dates, death dates, their whole story. Her finger traced the newest entries. Her marriage to Thomas, his death 3 years later, and blank space where future names should go. "This is why I can't let the bank take the ranch," she said quietly. "It's not just the land or cows. It's about keeping something alive that 3 generations of my family worked for." Silas thought about his own family, the parents and siblings he'd left behind when he chose to be alone. He'd been so focused on avoiding hurt that he never thought about building something to outlast him. "You mentioned wanting kids," he said carefully. Margaret's cheeks turned pink, but she didn't look away. "I want a family, kids who'll grow up knowing this land, carrying on what we started. I want my name in this Bible, not as the last one, but as the start of a new chapter." Her words made Silas's chest tighten. He'd spent so long convincing himself that being alone was better than dealing with people that he forgot what it felt like to be needed, not just for what he could do, but for who he could be. "That's a big ask for a guy you've known less than a week," he said. "Is it? We've worked together every day since you got here. I've seen how you treat animals, how you solve problems, how you keep your promises even when things change. I've seen you be kind when kindness was needed and tough when toughness was called for." Margaret closed the Bible and held it in her lap. "What more do I need to know? You might want to know why I spent 15 years alone in the mountains." Margaret looked at his face, seeing it close off a bit. "Only if you want to tell me. We've all got reasons for our choices. What matters is what we do next." Before Silas could answer, they heard hoofbeats. Both grabbed weapons. Margaret for a rifle by the barn, Silas for his knife. They relaxed when they saw it was Samuel Crawford, Margaret's neighbor, a man. In his 60s, with a back worn from years of hard work and eyes squinted from looking across wide lands. "Margaret!" he called, tipping his hat, then turned to Silas. "You must be the mountain man, Silas McGrow." Silas shook his hand, feeling the strong grip and noticing how Crawford sized him up, like he was checking for trouble. "Sam Crawford. I run cattle south of here when thieves don't take them." "You've had trouble too?" "Lost 6 cows last week. Same pattern as Margaret's. Nighttime, professional, tracks to the Badlands." Crawford got off his horse and took Margaret's offer of coffee. As they sat by the barn, he shared news that painted a scary picture. The cattle thefts were getting worse and smarter, hitting ranches across a 50-mile area, always in the same way. "They're not just stealing cows," Crawford said. "They're trying to ruin every ranch in the area. Keep this up and they'll buy the land cheap when the banks take it." Silas felt the puzzle pieces coming together. "You think, someone's trying to take over all the land? Someone smart enough to know that if you can't beat the competition, you make them go broke." Margaret set her coffee cup down hard. "Then we need to stop them. Easier said than done. They're organized, well-equipped, and know the land. What they don't expect is the ranchers fighting back together," Silas said. Crawford pulled out a folded paper. "I've been talking to everyone who's been hit. There's 12 ranches, all with the same problem. I say we. Stop fighting alone and start working as a team." Crawford's plan was simple but hard to pull off. The ranchers would share news about raids, help each other when attacked, and pool money to hire skilled men to track the thieves and get the cows back. "Problem is, most of us are too broke to pay much," Crawford admitted, looking at Silas. "But Margaret says you're good with tough situations. We could use someone like you to lead us." Silas wasn't expecting to be put in charge of something so big. Leading 12 ranches and their families was a lot, but it also sparked something in him he hadn't felt in years, a need to be part of something important. "I'd need to know more about who we're up against," he said. "How many men, what gear they have, where they're based." "That's step 1, Margaret said, excited. "If we team up instead of staying separate, we might actually win." "It's risky," Silas warned. "If we fight back as a group, they'll fight harder too. People could get hurt." "People are already getting hurt," Crawford said, grimly. Not with bullets, but when you take someone's living, you're taking their life. At least this way we're fighting back. That evening, after Crawford left with Silas's agreement to lead the ranchers, Margaret and Silas sat on her porch as the sun set behind the mountains. "You don't have to do this," Margaret said. "Leading 12 ranches isn't what you signed up for." "Maybe not, but it's what needs doing. It's dangerous. Crawford's right. If we fight back, we become targets." Silas watched. The sky darkened. "Margaret, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. When you look at me, what do you see?" The question surprised her. "I see a man who's been alone too long but is starting to remember what it's like to be part of something bigger. I see someone who's careful and thinks things through but isn't afraid to act when it's time." She paused, gathering courage. "I see the father of the kids I hope to have someday." Her words hit Silas deep, loosening the tight grip he'd kept on his feelings for years. "When I look in the mirror, I see a guy who ran from responsibility because he was scared of letting people down. But when I look at this ranch, at you, at the chance to build something lasting, I see a reason to stop running." Margaret took his hand, her fingers warm and steady. "Then let's stop running together." As night fell over the valley, they sat quietly, two people who met by chance, realizing some of life's biggest adventures start with a step you didn't plan. Their first big test came on a chilly October morning when Margaret woke to find 5 cows missing from the pasture near the house. The theft was so quiet, neither she nor Silas heard anything, even though they took turns watching at night. "They're getting braver," Silas said, kneeling by the fence, looking at tracks in the dirt. "See this? They cut the wire instead of using the gate. That's not random thieves. That's someone with tools and a plan." Margaret stood beside him, holding her rifle, her face angry like someone whose home had been invaded. 5 cows is almost 2 weeks of feed money. At this rate, we'll be broke before the bank even takes the place. Silas stood, brushing off his hands, already thinking. "They're testing us, seeing how fast we notice and what we do. What do? We follow the trail and find out where they're taking your cows." The tracks went north through the creek, just like Margaret said, but this time Silas could see fresh details. The cows were moved calmly, not rushed. Boot prints showed 3 men working together. The horse tracks suggested well-trained horses, not the rough ones most thieves used. "This is a pro job," he said as they tracked through tough terrain. "Not desperate guys stealing to eat. This is planned crime with money behind it." After 3 hours of careful tracking through rocky canyons, they looked down into a hidden valley where about 40 cows grazed, watched by 2 armed men. "There's our herd," Margaret whispered, pointing to cows with her brand. Silas studied the setup like someone used to dangerous spots. The valley was smartly chosen. One way in or out, good grass and water and clear views so no one could sneak up. "We can't take them with just us," he said quietly. "Too well defended, and we'd be shooting at hired hands, not the real problem." "Then what?" "We get info for Crawford and build a case for a big fight back." Margaret wanted to charge in, but saw the sense in Silas's plan. They spent an hour watching, noting the number of cows, guard positions, and the thieves' routine. On the ride home, their partnership hit its first real trouble. As they crossed an open meadow 2 miles from the ranch, they heard riders, too many, moving too fast to be anything but bad news. "There," Silas pointed to some rocks for cover. "Move." They reached the rocks just as 6 armed men appeared over the ridge, spreading out with guns drawn. "You folks been sightseeing?" their leader called, a man with a scarred face and a cocky tone. "Just checking our land," Margaret said, her voice steady despite the guns. "Funny thing about land," the scarred man said, getting off his horse and walking closer. "Sometimes people get confused about where it ends. Sometimes they wander where they shouldn't." Silas stepped between Margaret and the man, his hand near his knife. "We haven't crossed anyone's land," he said calmly. "Maybe not on paper, but there's all kinds of land, right? There's the kind in books, and the kind reasonable folks agree on." The scarred man was close now, his eyes mean and smart. "We've got a deal with folks around here. They mind their business. We mind ours. Everyone stays safe." "What's your business?" Silas asked. The man grinned, showing stained teeth. "We move cows from places they're not wanted to places they are." Margaret's anger flared. These were the men ruining her life, and now they were threatening her on her own land. "Those cows belong to people who worked hard for them," she said, stepping out despite Silas's warning. "Do they?" the man said. "I hear folks around here can't hold on to their stock. That's just how things work. Natural selection." "There's nothing natural about stealing," Margaret snapped. The man's face hardened. "Lady, watch your words. Accusations like that can hurt a guy's feelings." Silas felt the situation getting out of hand. 6 armed men, all with clear shots. Not great odds, but not impossible if he moved fast, and Margaret stayed calm. "Seems to me," Silas said, sounding relaxed. "Reputations are earned. A guy proud of his work doesn't mind it being talked about." "You're new here, mountain man," the scarred man said, hand on his gun. "First lesson, smart folks mind their own business. What's the second lesson? Folks who don't learn the first don't stick around for a third." The threat hung heavy. Margaret saw Silas calculating, his body calm but ready, like someone who'd been in tight spots before. "Well," Silas said, hand inching toward his knife, "I appreciate the lesson, but I'm not great at minding my business when it's about protecting people I care about." The scarred man's eyes narrowed. "Is that so?" "It is. And here's another thing. I've lived in tough places for 15 years, which means I'm either lucky or good at staying alive when folks try to stop me." The moment stretched tight, like a rope about to snap. Margaret's heart pounded, her rifle heavy in her hands, feeling the fight about to break out. Then, the scarred man stepped back and signaled his men. "This was fun," he said, getting on his horse. "But we've got places to be. Enjoy your ride." As the men rode off, Margaret's knees felt weak with relief, but Silas stayed tense, watching until they were gone. "Why'd they leave?" she asked. "They got what they wanted. They delivered a message and saw how we'd react." "What message?" Silas looked at her, his face protective but serious. "They know who we are, where we live, and what we've been doing. That was a warning, Margaret. Next time, it won't be." The ride back was quiet, Margaret checking behind, her every few minutes half expecting the riders to follow. But worse than the immediate danger was realizing what they were really up against. "They're not just thieves," she said as they unsaddled in the barn. "No, they're part of something bigger, organized, with lookouts and information. They knew we'd been to that valley before we got halfway home." Margaret sat on a hay bale, the weight of it all hitting her. "How do we fight that?" Silas leaned against the barn wall, thinking. "Same way you fight any big operation. You build a better one." That evening at Margaret's kitchen table, planning their next steps, she pulled a small wooden box from the mantel. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was a carved wooden cross Thomas made their first winter together. "Thomas carved this when we were snowed in for 3 weeks," she said, holding it so it caught the lamplight. "He wanted something to remind us we weren't alone, even when it felt like it." Silas looked at the cross, seeing the careful work and how years of touching had smoothed the wood. He was a good craftsman. He was, but he also knew faith gets you through hard times. Margaret held out the cross. "I want you to have this." "Margaret, I can't take something so special to you and Thomas." "You're not taking it. I'm giving it to you. It means something different now. Back then, it was about not being alone in the wild. Now it's about not being alone in this fight." Silas took the cross, feeling its warmth, and something inside him eased. "I'm not a religious guy. Thomas wasn't either when he made it. Sometimes faith isn't about religion. It's about believing things happen for a reason and we're strong enough to face what's next." As Silas put the cross in his pocket, he realized Margaret was offering him a place in her story, a role in the legacy she was building. "Thank you," he said, the words heavier than they seemed. "Thank you for staying, for fighting, for this place for me, for the future we might build together." Outside, the October wind carried the chill of winter. Inside, warmed by lamplight and the growing feeling they were stronger together, 2 people who met by chance kept planning a fight that would decide not just the ranch's fate, but who they'd become. The ranchers' meeting happened in Samuel. Crawford's barn on a gray November morning hinting at snow. 12 men and 3 women representing every ranch hit by thieves gathered around a rough table. Their faces showed a community under attack, worn out, worried, losing their livelihoods one stolen cow at a time. Silas stood at the table's head, feeling their expectations. These were tough folks used to making hard choices, and they trusted. A man they barely knew because things were that desperate. "Before we plan," he said, "let's understand what we're up against." He shared what he and Margaret learned. The hidden valley, the number of men, the organized setup with big money behind it. The group's faces grew darker as the problem's size sank in. "This isn't random," Crawford said. "Someone's targeting every ranch on purpose." "Who benefits if we all go under?" asked Martha Henderson, Joe's wife, who was sharp with numbers and helped manage the group. Silas had been thinking about that. Someone who wants cheap land when banks foreclose. Someone who sees a chance to own all the good grazing land. "That could be anyone with money and big plans," said Pete Morrison, whose ranch was up north. "Not anyone," Margaret said quietly. "It's someone who knows the area, knows which ranches are weakest and when to hit them." The idea hung heavy. Someone local might be involved. "Are we talking about someone we know?" Crawford asked. "Someone who knows us," Silas said carefully. "Whether we'd recognize them is another question." They spent the morning planning a team defense, sharing news with mirror signals and messengers, pooling resources, and working as one group instead of alone. "The goal is to make stealing unprofitable," Silas said. "Right now, they hit us easily with no risk. We change that. We change their game." "What if they fight back harder?" Margaret asked, voicing everyone's worry. "Then we find out what we're made of," Silas said. That afternoon brought their first test. While fixing a fence on Margaret's land, they saw smoke from Morrison's ranch. A mirror signal confirmed raiders had hit, too strong for the Morrisons alone. "This is it," Margaret said, saddling her horse. "Our chance to see if this team-up works." They rode to Morrison's through land Silas had studied, arriving to find 5 other ranchers already there. Pete Morrison met them, looking grim. "They hit the south pasture, took maybe 15 cows, burned the line shack, and killed 2 horses trapped in the corral. They're sending a message," Silas said, "showing what happens when we fight back." "What's our move?" Silas looked at the ranchers who dropped everything to help, armed and ready. For the first time in years, he felt the strength of being part of something bigger. "We track them, all of us. We find where they went, and show them hitting one of us means fighting all of us." The trail led north, the thieves not bothering to hide it, like they wanted a fight. "Could be a trap," Crawford warned as they moved through rough land. "Probably is," Silas said. "But sometimes you walk into a trap to beat it on your terms." They found the rustlers in the hidden valley from before, but now there were about 20 armed men guarding the entrance. "Not just 2. They've beefed up," Margaret said from their hiding spot. "This isn't the small job we saw before. No, someone's put big money into this." The standoff lasted 3 hours. The ranchers had the high ground and more people, but the rustlers were well placed for a fight. Crawford broke the silence. "You men down there," he shouted. "You're on our land with stolen cows. Ride out now or we'll make you." Gunshots answered, forcing the ranchers to duck. Silas had expected this and placed his people smartly. "Shoot back," he called, "but aim high. Scare them. Don't kill them." The fight was quick but clear. The rustlers' spot was good for a straight attack, but not for shots from all sides. In 20 minutes, white flags waved. "We're coming out," someone yelled. "Don't shoot." What followed was frontier justice, practical with guns nearby. The rustlers' leader was the scarred man, Jake Coulter, who said he worked for someone he wouldn't name. "Take your cows," he said as his men got ready to leave under the rancher's watch. "But this ain't over. We're just the hired. Guys, the man paying us has bigger plans than you can imagine." "Maybe it's time we met him," Silas said. Coulter laughed, but it wasn't funny. "You'll meet him soon, Mountain Man, and you'll wish you'd stayed out of it." As the rustlers rode off, leaving 60 stolen cows and the rancher's first big win, Margaret stood next to Silas at the valley's edge. "We did it," she said, amazed. "We won a battle," Silas corrected. But Coulter's right, this isn't over. That evening, driving the cows back to their owners, Margaret pulled out the silver locket she'd worn since Silas arrived. Inside were tiny photos of her parents, who'd come west believing hard work could build something lasting. "My dad said the frontier doesn't make people brave," she told Silas as they rode in the dark. "It just shows the courage they already had. What courage have you found in yourself today? I learned I'm not as alone as I thought. And maybe family isn't just about kids. It's about people who stand with you when things get hard." "Is that enough?" She looked at him, the fading light catching the gray in his hair and the lines from years of tough weather. "It's a start, but I still want those kids, Silas. I want to fill my grandmother's Bible with new names. And if this fight stops that, we'll finish the fight first, then make babies." Her bluntness made Silas smile, a real smile that changed his face, showing the man he could have been without years of being alone. "In that case," he said, touching the cross in his pocket, "we'd better win." 3 days later, a wanted poster appeared on a fence post in town. Margaret found it while getting supplies, and her heart sank as she read, "Wanted for murder, Silas McGrow, a.k.a. Grizzly. $500 reward. Armed and dangerous." A rough sketch of Silas's face was clear enough, with details only someone who'd seen him up close could know. Margaret tore it down, hands shaking. But new more were posted across the territory, spreading. Fast. She rode home, the poster hidden in her saddlebag, burning in her mind. The man she was falling for, the partner she wanted a future with, was a wanted murderer. It shook everything she thought she knew about him. Silas was fixing the barn roof when she got back, moving with sure, careful steps as he replaced shingles. For a moment, watching him in the sunlight, Margaret almost believed the poster was a mistake. This was a man who was gentle with hurt, animals, taught her better ways to handle cows, and carved her initials into a pitchfork handle as a surprise. "Silas," she called, her voice shaky. "I need to talk to you." He climbed down, seeing her face and setting his tools aside. "What is it?" She handed him the poster without a word, watching as his jaw tightened and his eyes went flat, like he was bracing for trouble. "Where'd you find this?" "In town." "Silas, is it true?" He folded the poster and handed it back. "Yes and no. That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give right now." He leaned against the corral fence, staring at the mountains where he'd hidden for 15 years. "The name on that poster is mine. The crime happened, but the story's more complicated than a poster can tell." Margaret felt a cold knot in her stomach. "Tell me the story." Silas was quiet, his voice heavy with old secrets when he spoke. 15 years ago, I was a different guy. I had a wife, Sarah, and a son, Benjamin, in Colorado. I was a territorial. Marshal. Dangerous work, but I was good at it, and it took care of my family. He paused, pain crossing his face as he dug up buried memories. There was a fight over land between a mining company and homesteaders. The company had papers for mineral rights, but the homesteaders were there first and claimed the surface. The courts were supposed to settle it, but the company didn't want to wait. What happened? They hired gunmen to push the homesteaders out, pros who made problems disappear with violence. I was supposed to keep the peace, but it's hard when one side has endless money and no morals. Margaret dreaded where this was going. It got worse. The company's men burned out homesteaders saying they were trespassing. When that wasn't fast enough, they started killing. Men, women, kids, making it look like accidents or random attacks. Silas faced her, his eyes showing pain and something darker, like he knew he'd made terrible choices. I tried to fix it legally, filed reports, asked for more marshals, wrote to the governor. But the company owned politicians, judges, even newspapers. Every legal path led nowhere. So what did you do? I did what I thought was right. I found the gunman's leader, Vincent Carrick, who'd killed at least 6 innocent people. I challenged him to a fair fight, thinking if I stopped him, the others might back off. I killed him, fair, with witnesses, legal by territorial law. But Carrick had powerful friends I didn't know about, family in politics, buddies in law enforcement. Within a week, the story twisted. I became a rogue marshal who murdered to help homesteaders steal company land. Margaret felt the story settle like rocks in her gut. So you ran. I ran. Left Sarah and Benjamin thinking I'd clear my name and come back. But the longer I stayed away, the worse the story got. By the time I realized I might never prove I was innocent, they'd died in a cholera outbreak. The silence was heavy. Margaret understood why Silas hid in the mountains for 15 years, why he didn't trust anyone or stay in one place. "I'm sorry," she said, feeling the words weren't enough. "I told myself I was protecting them by staying away, but really, I was protecting myself from facing what I'd done. Not the killing, but leaving them. I chose my pride over my family, and they died while I was hiding, feeling sorry for myself." Margaret looked at the poster, seeing it as a window into the tragedy that shaped the man she loved. Why tell me now? Because whoever's behind the rustling knows who I am. That poster wasn't an accident. Someone wants me out of the territory using my past to do it. Or they want the reward money. Maybe, but I think it's bigger. They want to stop the guy leading the fight against their operation. Margaret put her hand on his arm, feeling the tension in him, like he was ready to bolt. "What does this mean for us?" Silas covered her hand with his. "It means I should leave tonight, before someone decides $500 is worth more than their loyalty to you. If I go, you'll be safer. The rustlers will go back to hitting ranches one by one, and you might hold on to this place long enough to find another way to pay the bank." Margaret thought about what his leaving would mean. Without Silas, the ranchers' alliance would likely fall apart. The thieves would keep stealing, and most ranches would go broke in months. Everything they'd worked for, and the future she dreamed of, kids, a family, names in her Bible, would vanish. "There's another option," she said quietly. "What's that?" "We find out who's really behind this and clear your name." Silas shook his head. "Margaret, I've been running from this for 15 years. If I could have cleared my name, I would have. You were running alone. You didn't have help. You're talking about fighting powerful people with resources we can't match. It's not just dangerous. It's suicide." Margaret faced him, her eyes showing the strength that drew him to her. "Silas, remember what you said when you decided to stay? Sometimes the right thing doesn't make sense until you're brave enough to do it. This is different." "No, it's the same. We can let fear decide for us, or we can fight for what we're building. And if we fight and lose, if we end up dead or in jail?" Margaret pulled out her locket with her parents' photos and showed him their faces. People who risked everything for a new life. "Then we tried. We stood for something instead of running from it. Maybe that's enough." Silas looked at the photos, then at Margaret's determined face, feeling that same loosening in his chest. "All right," he said. "We fight, but we do it smart, and we do it together." "Together," she agreed, putting the locket away. As the sun set, painting the sky red and gold, they stood by the corral, planning their next steps. The poster changed everything, but also made one thing clear. They weren't just fighting for a ranch or their own futures. They were fighting for the right to choose their own path, to write their own story. The fight ahead would be dangerous, maybe deadly, but for the first time in 15 years, Silas wasn't running from his past. And for the first time in 3 years, Margaret wasn't facing the future alone. They started investigating at dawn. Margaret had a breakthrough while Silas focused on who might be watching them or how fast news of his identity would spread. "Whoever made that poster knows too much about now," she said over breakfast. "It's not 15 years old. It's new, with details about where you've been lately." Silas looked at the poster again, noticing a mention of a scar on his hand from 3 years ago. "You're right. Someone's been watching me, collecting fresh info, which means it's someone local who knows my past." They visited Crawford and other ranchers from the Valley fight, sharing the poster and watching. Reactions. Most were shocked and supportive, loyal to the man who helped get their cows back. But Martha Henderson spotted something key. "This poster's on fancy paper with good ink," she said. "Most wanted posters are cheap. This was made by someone with access to a real printer." "How many printers are in the territory?" Margaret asked. "2. The newspaper in town and the land office that makes legal papers and maps." Silas felt things clicking into place. The land office. That explains how they know about property ownership, bank loans, and which ranches are weakest. Crawford nodded grimly. "It fits." The picture was scarier than they thought. The land office wasn't just a government office. It made money from land sales, especially when ranchers went broke. Someone there could pick out easy targets and plan attacks to force sales. "We need to see their records," Silas said. "Find out who's been asking about land, who's ready to buy when foreclosures happen. How do we do that without tipping them off?" Margaret had an idea. "I've got a plan, but you won't like it." Her idea was bold but simple. She'd go to the land office, pretending to explore options for her money troubles. As a rancher facing foreclosure, she'd have a good reason to ask about land values, recent sales, and who might buy troubled properties. "It's too risky," Silas said. "If they figure out you're snooping, you're a target. We're already targets. The question is, do we sit back or take action?" The land office was a big building in town, looking rich compared to the struggling ranches. Margaret walked in like it was any business deal, but her senses were sharp for clues. The man at the desk, William Thornton, assistant land commissioner, was younger than she expected. About 35, well-dressed, with soft hands from indoor work. "Mrs. Lawson," he said with a smooth smile. "What brings you here?" "Money. Troubles, Mr. Thornton. You know many ranches are struggling. I want to know my options before I'm out of choices." Thornton looked sympathetic. "Tough times for ranchers. Sit down, let's talk." Their talk was like a careful game. Margaret played a worried widow, asking about her situation, but listened closely to Thornton's answers, noting how much he knew about every ranch's problems. "I hear some properties have sold lately," she said casually. "Is the market as bad as it seems, or are there buyers for good land?" "Depends on good," Thornton said. "Cattle thefts have hurt values, but some investors see the land's future and are ready to buy." "Investors? Anyone I know?" "I can't name clients, but there's a group buying up troubled land. They've got cash to buy fast, no? Bank hassle." Margaret's heart raced. "That sounds like what I need. Can you set up a meeting?" Thornton paused, and Margaret saw calculation in his eyes, not just caution. "Maybe," he said. "They like to keep things quiet. They don't want people stirring up trouble." "Trouble? You know, folks who don't get honest business, people who might mess up deals." Margaret knew he was warning her, but saw a chance. "I like quiet deals. When can we meet?" "Tomorrow night, maybe, at the old Carver place. The abandoned. Homestead 10 miles north, 8 o'clock. Leaving the office, Margaret felt both excited and scared. She'd learned a lot, but had set herself and Silas up for a dangerous meeting. On the ride home, she realized Thornton's careful words showed a plot to buy up ranch land, run through the government itself. Silas was in the barn, sharpening his knife with focus that meant he expected trouble. When she told him about the Carver Place meeting, his face went blank. "It's a trap," he said. "Of course, but it's our only shot to find out who's behind this." "Margaret, they're not inviting us to talk land deals. They want to get rid of us." "I know, but do we keep playing defense or take the fight to them?" Silas tested his knife, drawing a bit of blood. "Our way would mean not walking into an ambush. Then we don't walk in. We spring the trap ourselves." That evening, Margaret brought out her mother's wedding dress, kept in cedar and lavender for her next wedding. The dress was simple but beautiful, with delicate lace. "I've been saving this for the right time," she said, holding it up in her bedroom mirror. "I always thought I'd wear it when I married again, with someone worth building a life with." Silas saw her reflection, not just the woman he loved, but a symbol of what they were fighting for. Tradition, a future. They chose. "You will wear it," he said. "When this is over, when we've cleared my name and saved your ranch, you'll wear it at our wedding." Margaret turned to him. "Is that a proposal?" "It's a promise. Win or lose, I'm done running. From happiness. If we survive, I want to marry you, fill your Bible's pages, build something lasting." She stepped closer, seeing the resolve in his eyes. "And if we don't survive, then we'll have died fighting for something worth it, not living scared of losing it." Margaret folded the dress and put it away. "Then let's make sure we survive." Their plan was tricky, but needed. They'd get to the Carver place early, hide to watch, and escape if things went bad. Crawford and 3 ranchers would wait nearby, ready to help if it turned violent. They'd bring proof of the thefts, bank pressure, and land office links to expose the plot. "The goal isn't just to survive," Silas said, checking weapons. It's to get enough evidence to stop this for good, even if we don't make it. The others can take it to federal authorities. As they got ready, Margaret felt an odd calm. After months of fighting unknown enemies, she was finally acting on her terms with a partner she trusted. Silas, she said by their saddled horses in the dusk. Whatever happens tonight, these past weeks have been the happiest of my life, not because they were easy, but because I found someone worth fighting with. He pulled out the cross. She gave him, worn smooth from touching. You gave me this for faith. Faith that things happen for a reason, that we're strong enough for what's next. Tonight that faith gets tested. I believe we'll pass. They rode to the Carver, place in the dark, a Montana night that might be their last. Margaret thought about their journey. A wrong turn that led to partnership, then love, now a fight for their community's future. The abandoned homestead appeared as the moon rose, lights in the house and horses tied outside, showing the trap was set. Ready? Silas asked, checking his weapons. Ready, Margaret said, touching her locket, her parents' faces reminding her some things were worth any risk. Together they rode toward the fight that would decide if their accidental love story would end happily or become another frontier tragedy. The Carver homestead looked broken in the moonlight, its empty windows and sagging roof telling of a failed dream. But tonight, light came from those windows, and voices carried through the air. The shadowy plot was finally in one place. Silas checked his father's pocket watch, a family heirloom ticking down to their biggest fight. 8:15, he whispered as they neared on foot, horses hidden in trees. Late enough to seem like we're coming as asked, early enough to catch them off guard. Stick to the plan, he told Margaret. I go in first, check things out. You stay outside with the signal mirror. If it goes bad, signal Crawford and get out. We go in together or not at all, she said firmly. I'm not losing you to some old-fashioned hero idea. Silas wanted to argue, but saw her resolve and respected her too much to fight it now. The front door was open, a crack, light spilling onto the porch. They heard three voices, William Thornton from the land office, maybe Jake Coulter, his rough tone, and a third fancy voice sounding like a boss. I told you we needed to be subtle, the fancy voice said. Posters and fights draw attention we don't want. The mountain man was organizing ranchers, Coulter snapped. Had to stop him before he ruined everything. Now we've got federal marshals sniffing around, exactly what we didn't want. Silas and Margaret shared a look. Federal marshals meant their investigation was part of a bigger effort. The fix is simple, Thornton said smoothly. We take out the last troublemakers and speed up buying land. In 6 months, we'll own 90% of the grazing land, and ranchers who won't sell will learn how dangerous the frontier can be without protection. Margaret's anger flared. These men talked about ruining her community like it was just business. Enough listening, Silas whispered. Time to see who we're dealing with. He pushed the door open and stepped into the light. Margaret, right behind. The three men at the table looked up, surprised, then calculating. Thornton they knew. Coulter was the scarred man they expected. But the third was a shock. Judge Marcus Harrison, who'd handled rancher disputes, dressed in a fancy suit with a gold watch chain. Judge Harrison? Margaret said, stunned. Didn't expect you here. Harrison looked a bit embarrassed, but recovered fast. Mrs. Lawson, Mr. McGrow, I hear you wanted to talk about selling your land. Actually, Silas said, hand near his knife, we're here to talk about yours. The room felt like it could explode. Margaret saw Coulter. Reached for his gun, sensed Silas ready for action. Gentlemen, she said loudly, trying to calm things, let's talk like civilized people. Civilized folks don't steal cows or burn out neighbors, Silas said, his voice calm but dangerous. They don't fake wanted posters or use government offices for crime, Judge. Harrison sighed and checked his watch like he'd made a tough call. Mr. McGrow, I hoped we could settle this nicely. Your reputation says you're a practical man. My reputation's built on 15-year-old lies, but my reality is I'm done running from people who think power lets them ruin lives. That thinking makes you a problem we need to fix. Harrison's words were a signal. Coulter went for his gun, fast from years of practice, but Silas was faster. His knife flew with deadly aim, hitting Coulter's chest before his gun cleared. The holster. Coulter fell, shocked, across the table. At the same time, Margaret aimed her rifle at Thornton, who was reaching for a small gun. The click of her rifle's hammer was loud in the quiet. "Don't," she said. Thornton froze. Harrison hadn't moved, sitting back like a chess player who'd lost an unexpected move. "Well," he said calmly, "this isn't how I thought tonight would go." "Your night's just starting," Silas said, cleaning his knife on Coulter's shirt. "We've got questions, and you're answering them, or you join him." Harrison saw the seriousness in Silas's face. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. How long this has been going on, who's involved, what's the goal?" Harrison's confession laid it all bare. He and some territorial officials had been targeting weak ranches for 2 years, using legal tricks, money pressure, and violence to force cheap sales. "The territory's becoming a state soon," Harrison said like a teacher. "Land values will skyrocket. Someone smart enough to grab land now will make a fortune." "And the families you ruined?" Margaret asked. "They're just part of progress. The weak always lose when times change." Margaret felt sick hearing Harrison's casual talk of destroying her community. These weren't desperate criminals. They were educated men abusing their power. "How many other officials are in on it?" she asked. "Enough to make legal fights tough." "That's about to change," Silas said. They heard horses approaching, not rushing, but steady. "That's Crawford," Margaret said, signaling with her mirror. But the riders weren't ranchers. 3 men with federal marshal badges rode up, guns drawn, focused on the house. "Federal marshals," one called. "We're here for a criminal." "Conspiracy? Come out with hands up." Silas and Margaret shared a look, realizing their work had crossed with a bigger federal case. The poster wasn't a disaster, it was part of a larger plan. "Looks like your friends won't help you," Silas told Harrison as they prepared to surrender. "And your reputation's about to be checked by people with better info than a 15-year-old poster," Margaret added. The lead marshal, Thomas, Wade, about 50 with gray hair, looked at the scene. 1 dead man, 2 prisoners, 2 armed civilians, and wasn't shocked. "Marshal Wade, Federal Bureau," he said, badge shining. "Mr. McGrow, Mrs. Lawson, lower your weapons. You're safe." "How do you know us?" Margaret asked, lowering her rifle. "We've been investigating this for 6 months. Your work helped us." The truth was wilder than the conspiracy. The wanted poster wasn't from the criminals. It was federal bait to make the real crooks show themselves. "The charges against—" "You were dropped 12 years ago," Wade told Silas. "New evidence proved Carrick was a killer, and you acted in self-defense. By the time we found you, you'd vanished so well even we couldn't track you." Silas felt the ground shift. He'd run for 12 years from charges that didn't exist, hiding from a system that had cleared him. "The poster was our idea," Wade said. "We knew someone here was using local law to run crimes. We thought threatening the guy leading the ranchers would make them slip up." "You used us as bait," Margaret said, her voice sharp. "We used a situation already happening." Wade corrected. "Mr. McGrow was organizing resistance. We just made the criminals act openly." Harrison cuffed, laughed bitterly. "Smart move, Marshal. Sacrifice the people you're supposed to protect to catch the bad guys." "Judge Harrison," Wade said coldly, "we've got evidence of your land fraud, cattle theft, and 2 murders since March. Cooperate or face the consequences alone." The interrogation showed the full plot. Harrison's group used their government roles to target ranches, steal cows, fake legal cases, and scare witnesses to control land for when Montana became a state. Families were just obstacles, Harrison said, resigned. "The frontier doesn't care about feelings. The frontier doesn't have room for people who think progress lets them ruin lives," Margaret said. As the marshals took their prisoners away, Wade pulled Silas aside. "The Marshal Service could use your skills. Good pay, tough work, protecting people from corruption like this. Thanks, but I've got other plans now." Wade glanced at Margaret, giving her statement to a deputy. "She seems worth settling down for." "She is, but it's more than that. This community needs folks who'll stand with them when it's hard. I ran from responsibility for 15 years. Time to live up to it. If we need you for other cases?" You'll know where to find me. But my first loyalty's here, to her, to the life we're building. As the marshals left with the criminals, ending the threat to the ranchers, Silas and Margaret stood alone in the homestead. The lamplight cast shadows in the room where big things were decided. "It's over," Margaret said, barely believing it. "The immediate danger's over," Silas said. "But we've got to rebuild what they tried to take, and there's us to figure out." He pulled out a marriage license from Wade, valid in Montana with just their signatures and a witness. "Wade thought we'd need this," he said, handing it to her. "Seems federal marshals are more romantic than I thought." Margaret read the license, seeing the words that would make their partnership a legal bond. "Is this your proposal? It's my way of saying I want something permanent with you. I want to fill your Bible's pages, prove wrong turns can lead to the right place." Margaret looked around the homestead where they'd faced their enemies. It wasn't a typical spot for a proposal, but their whole relationship was unusual. "Yes," she said, "I'll marry you." As they walked to their horses under the moonlight, toward a secure ranch and a shared future, Margaret knew the cross Silas carried wasn't their only symbol of faith. The license in her hands was faith too, faith that two people who met by chance could choose to stay together, building something lasting from chaos and courage. The conspiracy was over. Silas's legal troubles were gone. Margaret's ranch was safe. For the first time since meeting, they could choose their future, and they chose each other. 6 months later, kids' laughter filled the valley. Margaret McGraw stood in her ranch house doorway, watching Silas teach neighbor kids to track deer in spring snow. It was hard to imagine this scene during last fall's dark days when thieves and corrupt officials nearly destroyed everything. Time had healed wounds and built new strength. The territorial government was cleaned up, with new officials under federal watch. The ranching community came out stronger for facing the crisis together. Margaret's ranch showed renewal everywhere. Healthy, cows in green pastures, rebuilt barns, strong fences on safe land. The house was no longer a lonely widow's home, but the heart of a growing family. She touched her belly, feeling the baby due in late summer, the first new McGraw to go in her grandmother's Bible in over 30 years. The blank pages that once marked the end of her family now promised a new start. Silas looked up from the kids' lesson and met her eyes across the yard. Even after 6 months of marriage, he still took her breath away. He'd filled out, the thinness of his hermit days replaced by the build of a man eating regular meals made with love. Margaret had trimmed his hair, and his beard was neat now, not wild. But the biggest change was his eyes, no longer weary, but steady with the confidence of a man who'd found his place. He didn't look ready to run anymore. He looked like he belonged. "How are you feeling?" he asked, coming to the porch with gentle concern since her pregnancy. "Like a woman carrying the future McGraw," she said, sitting in the rocking chair he'd built her last winter. "And how's that future feeling? Active? Restless? Ready to take on whatever's next?" Silas sat on the steps, resting his hand on her belly. They felt the baby move, a living sign of hope and continuity they hadn't dared dream of early on. "Samuel Crawford stopped by yesterday while you were in town," Margaret said. "The legislature approved statehood. Montana will be a state within the year. Good news for landowners. Property values are rising. Samuel thinks we should expand, maybe buy land from the sales after the conspiracy broke." Silas thought it over. They had money now, federal compensation for ranchers' losses, and a thriving herd. "What do you think?" "I think we should build something that lasts, not just something big. I want our kids to inherit land cared for well, not just piled up for show." Her wisdom was classic Margaret, thinking of generations, not just quick wins. "Speaking of kids," Silas said, pulling a small object from his pocket, "I finished this yesterday." The cradle was a work of art, made with wood he'd picked and shaped by hand. It was built to last for their baby and maybe more McGraws. Her initials were carved with his on the headboard, along with their wedding date and a small cross like the one she'd given him. "It's beautiful," Margaret said, her voice thick. "Thomas would have liked the craftsmanship." "I hope so. I built it like he might have, something to last, to be part of our family's story." Mentioning Thomas felt natural now. Early in their marriage, Margaret worried Silas might feel he was competing with Thomas's memory, or that she was betraying her first love. But time showed them love didn't shrink with past bonds. It grew stronger. He would have liked you, she said. You both knew building something good takes patience and care. As evening came, neighbors arrived for their weekly gathering, a habit started during the crisis but kept because they wanted to. Crawford's family brought bread and town news. The Hendersons brought garden veggies and schoolhouse updates. Others added food and talk about community needs and joys. These gatherings grew from necessity but became a cornerstone of their lives, strengthening ties and planning their future together. Watching Silas move among neighbors, talking cattle with men, helping women with advice, playing with kids who saw him as an uncle and hero, Margaret saw his change from loner to community leader, complete and amazing. I never thought I'd see him at the center of a gathering, Crawford said, joining her on the porch while Silas refereed a kids' game. Why not? When he first came, he looked like someone hurt so bad he'd given up on people. You could see it in how he stood, always ready for trouble. But now, look at him. Margaret watched Silas settle a kid's argument with patience and firmness, teaching them to talk it out. People change when they have a reason, she said, hand on her belly, feeling the baby, the reason Silas became better. As the